A baby all alone walked up to a suitcase dumped in a landfill. Inside was a German shepherd sewn shut, but still alive. The baby's reaction to the barks moved even the police. Watch until the end. What he did will stay with you forever. If this kind of story touches you, subscribe and hit that bell. In the outskirts of Maplewood, a quaint town nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont, life unfolded with the predictable rhythm that small communities often cherish. The morning dew glistened on blades of grass, and the buzz of cicadas announced the arrival of dusk with clockwork precision. For most residents, the days blended together in a comfortable monotony, until one ordinary Tuesday in June changed everything. Martha Sullivan, a 72-year-old widow with silver hair always neatly pinned back and hands that told stories of decades of hard work, followed her daily routine without exception. Every morning after breakfast, she would take her 8-month-old grandson, Caleb, for a stroll, while his mother, Jenny, worked the early shift at the local diner. Today's destination was the town's recycling center, where Martha often collected discarded items to transform into the handcrafted treasures she sold at the weekend farmers market. "Look at the blue sky, little one," Martha cooed as she pushed the stroller along the familiar path lined with oak trees. Caleb gurgled happily in response, his bright eyes taking in the world around him with the wonder only babies possess. Martha savored these moments, finding joy in the simple pleasure of introducing her grandson to the world. The recycling center, situated at the edge of town where the paved roads surrendered to dirt paths, wasn't much to look at. A collection of large metal containers, a small office building, and piles of sorted materials created a patchwork landscape that most townsfolk avoided. But Martha saw potential where others saw trash. A discarded picture frame might become a cherished gift, or a forgotten lamp could illuminate a new home with just a little love and creativity. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan," called out Frank Donahue, the center's manager, waving from his small office window. "Brought the little man again, I see," Martha waved back with a smile. "He's my lucky charm, Frank. Helps me find the best treasures." As they made their way around the perimeter of the property, Martha kept to her usual path, pushing the stroller carefully over the uneven ground. The June heat was building, and she planned to finish quickly before the midday sun became too intense for Caleb's sensitive skin. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart, and then we'll head back for your nap," she promised, pulling the stroller's canopy lower to shield him from the strengthening rays. It was then that something unusual happened. As they approached an area of the center rarely frequented by collectors, a corner where larger items awaited proper disposal, Caleb's demeanor suddenly changed. The content baby, who had been babbling happily moments before, began to squirm. In his seat, his face contorted with an expression Martha had never seen before. "What's wrong, little one?" she asked, bending down to check his diaper and temperature. But Caleb wasn't hungry, wet, or feverish. His discomfort seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. When she straightened up, Martha noticed something peculiar. Each time Caleb's fussing paused, a muffled sound emerged from somewhere nearby, a sound so faint she might have missed it entirely if not for the momentary silences between her grandson's cries. Caleb's tiny hand extended suddenly, pointing with surprising determination toward a dark blue suitcase half hidden behind a pile of discarded furniture. His eyes, now wide and focused, remained fixed on the object as his cries intensified. "What is it, Caleb?" Martha whispered, her heart beginning to race. In all her years of raising children and now helping with her grandchild, she had never witnessed such behavior from an infant. There was something almost primal about his reaction, an urgency that transcended his limited ability to communicate. The sound came again, clearer this time, a muffled bark, weak but unmistakable. Martha's breath caught in her throat. Leaving. The stroller securely braked a few feet away. She approached the suitcase cautiously. Years of living alone had taught her prudence, but the distress in Caleb's voice pushed her forward, despite her hesitation. The suitcase was expensive looking, but weathered, its zipper partially open as if someone had left in haste. Martha's hands trembled slightly as she knelt beside it, her joints protesting the sudden movement. The barking had stopped, but now she could hear labored breathing coming from within. "Hello?" she called softly, not expecting a human response, but needing to break the tension of the moment. "Is something in there?" Carefully, she pulled the zipper further, revealing just enough space to peek inside. What she saw made her gasp and cover her mouth with a weathered hand. Inside the dark confines of the luggage was a German shepherd puppy, no more than a few months old, its beautiful coat dulled by dehydration and neglect. But what truly horrified Martha was the realization that the animal couldn't move. Its paws had been cruelly stitched to the bottom lining of the suitcase. "Oh, dear Lord," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. Behind her, Caleb had gone, completely silent, his eyes still fixed on the suitcase as if he understood the gravity of what they had discovered. In that moment, something profound connected grandmother, grandchild, and the suffering creature before them. A thread of compassion that transcended age, species, and circumstance. Martha's hands moved with newfound purpose. "Frank!" she called out, her voice stronger than she thought possible. "Frank, come quickly, call the police." As Frank came running from his office, phone already in hand, Martha turned back to Caleb with wonder in her eyes. "How did you know, little one?" she whispered. "How did you hear what no one else could?" The puppy inside the suitcase made a weak sound, and Martha made a silent promise. This wouldn't be the end of the story. It would be just the beginning. News of the discovery spread through Maplewood with the speed only small towns can manage. By early afternoon, the recycling center had transformed into an impromptu gathering place. Police cars lined the entrance, their lights casting rhythmic blue patterns across the scene. Officer Stanley Peterson, a 30-year veteran of the Maplewood Police Department, knelt beside the now open suitcase, his weathered face revealing emotions he usually kept carefully hidden. "In all my years," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I've never seen anything like this, and to think that if it wasn't for that baby—" Martha stood nearby, holding Caleb close to her chest. The baby was calm now, his earlier distress replaced by curious observation as a small team of people worked to carefully free the puppy from its prison. Dr. Sarah Reynolds, the town's only veterinarian, worked meticulously to cut the cruel stitches that bound the animal to the suitcase lining. "He's severely dehydrated," she reported, her professional tone belying the anger in her eyes. "But I think we found him in time." As the last stitch was cut and the puppy was gently lifted from the suitcase, something remarkable happened. Despite its weakened state, the animal turned its head toward Martha and Caleb, its amber eyes meeting the baby's blue ones in a moment of connection that left everyone present in stunned silence. Officer Peterson, a man not given to sentimentality, wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. "That child," he said softly, "has just saved a life." And as the puppy was carefully placed in a transport carrier, Martha couldn't help but feel that something extraordinary had begun in their little town, something that would change not just the fate of one abandoned animal, but perhaps the hearts of an entire community. The Maplewood Veterinary Clinic buzzed with activity, unlike anything it had seen in years. Word had spread quickly about the German shepherd puppy found at the recycling center, and the waiting room now hosted an unlikely gathering of concerned citizens. Martha Sullivan sat in a worn armchair, with Caleb dozing in her arms, her thoughts circling around the extraordinary events of the morning. Dr. Sarah Reynolds emerged from the treatment room, her scrubs bearing evidence of the delicate work she'd been doing for the past 2 hours. The room fell silent as everyone awaited her update. "He's stabilized," she announced, removing her surgical cap to reveal auburn hair pulled into a messy ponytail. "We've got him on fluids to address the dehydration, and I've treated the wounds. On his paws. He's malnourished, but young enough that with proper care, he should make a complete physical recovery." A collective sigh of relief filled the small waiting area. But it was Officer Peterson's question that brought the room back to the gravity of the situation. "And the evidence?" he asked, notepad ready in his weathered hands. Sarah's expression hardened. "I've documented everything, Stan. Photos, tissue, samples, everything you'll need. The stitches were deliberate. This wasn't an accident or a misguided attempt to help the animal. Whoever did this wanted that puppy to suffer." Officer Peterson nodded grimly, making notes. "Any identifying characteristics, microchip tattoo, anything that might tell us where he came from?" "No microchip," Sarah replied, "but there is something unusual. He has a small birthmark on his belly in the shape of a crescent moon. It's distinctive enough that a breeder or previous owner might recognize it." As the adults discussed the investigation, Martha noticed that Caleb had awakened and was watching the veterinarian with unusual intensity for an 8-month-old. When he began making small sounds and reaching out toward the treatment room door, Martha felt a chill run down her spine. "I think he wants to see the puppy," she said softly, interrupting the conversation. Dr. Reynolds turned to Martha with a curious expression. "You mentioned on the phone that Caleb was the one who alerted you to the suitcase, that he heard the puppy when no one else did." Martha nodded. "It was the strangest thing, Sarah. We've known each other since high school, so you know I'm not one for exaggeration. But that child..." She looked down at her grandson with wonder. "He knew. Somehow, he knew." Sarah exchanged a glance with Officer Peterson, then made a decision. "Why don't you come back to the recovery area? Just you and Caleb, Martha. It might be good for both the baby and the puppy." They followed Sarah through the clinic to a quiet room where the German Shepherd puppy lay on a padded table, an IV line delivering fluids to his dehydrated body. He was cleaned up now, his coat revealing a rich pattern of black and tan, though still dull from malnutrition. Bandages wrapped his paws where the cruel stitches had been removed. As they approached, the puppy's eyes opened, alert despite his weakened state. When his gaze fell on Caleb, his tail thumped weakly against the padding. "Well, I'll be," Sarah whispered. "He remembers." Caleb squirmed in Martha's arms, making the excited sounds that preceded his attempts at communication. Martha, carefully, brought him closer, keeping a safe distance, but allowing puppy and child to see each other clearly. "His name is Hope," Martha said suddenly, the words coming to her without conscious thought. "That's what we should call him." "Hope," Sarah repeated, nodding. "It fits." Just then, Jenny Sullivan burst through the door, her waitress uniform still on and her face flushed from rushing. "Mom, I came as soon as I could get someone to cover my shift. Is Caleb okay? Frank called the diner and said something about the police and..." She stopped short when she saw the puppy, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God." Martha quickly reassured her daughter. "Caleb is fine, Jenny. Better than fine, actually. He's a hero." As Martha recounted the morning's events, Jenny's expression transformed from concern to astonishment. She looked at her son with new eyes, then at the injured puppy on the table. "The manager at the diner said people are already calling him the miracle baby," Jenny said, stroking Caleb's fine hair. "Said the whole town's talking about how he saved that poor animal." Sarah cleared her throat. "About that, Jenny, has Caleb had his hearing tested recently?" Jenny looked confused. "Just the standard tests after birth. Why?" "I have a colleague in Burlington, Dr. Michaels, who specializes in pediatric auditory processing," Sarah explained. What Martha described about Caleb's reaction, being able to hear the puppy when adults couldn't, it reminds me of something I read in a journal last year about heightened auditory sensitivity in infants. Jenny's expression grew concerned. "Is there something wrong with my baby?" Sarah quickly shook her head. "Not wrong, just unique. Some children are born with exceptional auditory processing abilities. They can hear frequencies and nuances that most people can't detect. It's often paired with heightened emotional empathy. If Caleb has this condition, it would explain how he was able to hear Hope's muffled cries when no one else could." Martha watched as her daughter processed this information, seeing the same mixture of wonder and worry she herself had felt earlier. Jenny had been raising Caleb alone since her husband was deployed overseas 6 months ago. Every new challenge carried the double weight of single parenthood. "We'll have him tested," Jenny decided, squaring her shoulders with determination. "If he has this gift, I want to understand it, help him with it." While the three women discussed the next steps, Officer Peterson appeared at the doorway with a serious expression. "Sarah, there's something you need to see," he said, holding up an evidence bag containing what looked like a small metal tag that had been cut from a collar. "We found this in a pocket of the suitcase. It's got a symbol on it." Sarah examined the tag through the plastic. "That's an identification marker from Oak Ridge Kennels," she said, her brow furrowing. "They're a high-end breeder about 50 miles north of here, specialize in German Shepherds for show competitions." Peterson nodded. "Already called them. Owner says they haven't reported any missing puppies, but they did sell a litter 8 weeks ago to various buyers. They're sending over registration information for all the puppies. That crescent moon birthmark might help identify which puppy this is," Sarah suggested. As the adults continued their conversation, Martha noticed something remarkable. Hope had managed to lift his head despite his weakness, his eyes never leaving Caleb. And the baby, normally squirmy and difficult to hold still, sat quietly in her arms, returning the puppy's gaze with equal intensity. In that moment, Martha knew with certainty that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary connection between her grandson and the rescued German Shepherd, a bond formed in crisis that might well prove unbreakable. Later that evening, as word continued to spread throughout Maplewood, Martha sat on her porch swing with Caleb sleeping peacefully in her arms. Jenny had returned to finish her shift. At the diner, where customers were leaving larger tips than usual after hearing about her son's remarkable deed. The phone had been ringing all afternoon, neighbors offering help, local news wanting interviews, even the mayor calling to express his pride in the youngest hero Maplewood has ever known. Martha had politely declined most calls, preferring the quiet of the evening to process the day's events. From her porch, she could see the lights of the veterinary clinic where Hope was beginning his long recovery. Dr. Reynolds had decided to stay overnight to monitor his condition, refusing to leave the puppy alone after all he had endured. Across the street, Eleanor Jacobson emerged from her house carrying a small basket. At 82, Eleanor was the oldest resident of Maple Street and Martha's closest friend. She made her way slowly across the road, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the pavement. "Brought you some of my famous banana bread," Eleanor announced, settling beside Martha on the swing. "Figured you might not have had time to eat today, what with saving the world and all." Martha chuckled softly, careful not to wake Caleb. "Hardly saved the world, Ellie. Just one little puppy." Eleanor's wise eyes crinkled at the corners. "One soul at a time is how the world gets saved, Martha. Always has been." She looked down at the sleeping baby. "This little one started something, you know. People are talking about more than just a rescued dog. They're talking about what it means to truly see suffering around us, even when it's hidden away in suitcases we'd rather not open." Esau. As the porch swing gently rocked in the summer evening, Martha pondered her friend's words. Something had awakened in Maplewood today, Not just compassion for a suffering animal, but a recognition of the extraordinary connections that can exist between the most vulnerable among us. Inside the veterinary clinic, Hope slept too, his dreams free from pain for the first time in days. And though the puppy and the baby were separated by distance, something invisible but powerful connected them still. A bond formed in one unlikely moment that would continue to transform not only their lives, but the heart of an entire community. 3 weeks after the discovery at the recycling center, Maplewood had settled into a new normal. The initial media frenzy had subsided, though occasional reporters still visited hoping to capture footage of the miracle baby and his rescued dog. But for Martha Sullivan, the truly miraculous developments were happening quietly, away from the cameras. The Sullivan home had become the unofficial headquarters for Hope's recovery journey. Though the puppy remained under Dr. Reynolds' care, at the clinic during the first week, Sarah had eventually agreed that Hope could continue his healing in a home environment, with daily check-ins from the veterinarian. "He's responding remarkably well to treatment," Sarah explained as she removed the bandages from Hope's paws for inspection one sunny morning in July. "These wounds are healing cleanly, no signs of infection." Martha watched from the kitchen, a doorway where she was preparing a batch of her famous blueberry muffins. "He's a fighter, that one. Reminds me of someone else I know." She glanced meaningfully toward the living room, where Jenny sat on the floor with Caleb, helping him stack colorful blocks. The bond between the baby and the puppy had only grown stronger with each passing day. When Hope had first arrived at the Sullivan home, weak and still bewildered by his ordeal, it was Caleb who seemed to understand intuitively what the puppy needed. The baby would become unusually calm whenever Hope was near, as if conserving his energy to share with his four-legged friend. "The test results came back from Dr. Michaels in Burlington," Jenny called out, not taking her eyes off Caleb as he determinedly reached for another block. "He says Caleb has something called heightened auditory processing sensitivity. Apparently, it's rare but not unheard of. Caleb can detect sounds at frequencies most people can't perceive, especially sounds of distress." Sarah nodded as she applied fresh ointment to Hope's healing paws. "That explains how he heard Hope when no one else could. The suitcase would have muffled the barking to a frequency range most human ears would miss completely." "Doctor, Michael says it often comes with enhanced emotional intelligence too," Jenny continued, pride evident in her voice. "He thinks that's why Caleb responds so strongly to Hope. He's not just hearing him differently, he's feeling what he feels." Martha smiled as she slid the muffin tray into the oven. "My grandson, the dog whisperer." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it, finding Eleanor Jacobson on the porch with a large manila envelope. "Morning, Martha," Eleanor greeted her with a warm smile. "Mayor Thompson asked me to drop this by on my way to the community center." Martha ushered her friend inside and opened the envelope. Inside was an official-looking certificate declaring Caleb Sullivan, an honorary citizen protector of Maplewood, along with a formal invitation to a town council meeting the following week. "They're introducing a new animal welfare ordinance," Eleanor explained, accepting the cup of coffee Martha offered. "Stricter penalties for mistreatment, mandatory reporting protocols for suspected abuse, education programs in schools. They're calling it Caleb's Law." Jenny looked up from her spot on the floor, her expression a mixture of pride and disbelief. "All because of what happened with Hope." Eleanor nodded, settling into her favorite armchair. "Sometimes it takes one extraordinary moment to awaken people to what needs changing. That's what your son did, Jenny. He woke up this town." As if understanding he was being discussed, Caleb abandoned his blocks and crawled determinedly toward Hope, who lay on his special orthopedic bed near the sofa. The puppy's tail began to wag vigorously as the baby approached, his amber eyes bright with recognition. Dr. Reynolds watched with professional interest as Caleb reached Hope and gently, with more care than seemed possible for an infant, placed his tiny hand on the puppy's head. Hope responded by inching forward until his nose touched Caleb's cheek, eliciting a burst of delighted giggles from the baby. "I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 15 years, Sarah said quietly, "and I've never seen anything quite like the connection between these two." Eleanor's eyes twinkled as she sipped her coffee. "Speaking of connections, Martha, have you told them about the Golden Years project yet?" Martha shot her friend a look that clearly said, "Not yet," but it was too late. Jenny's curiosity was piqued. "What Golden Years project?" she asked, looking between the older women. With a sigh that couldn't quite hide her excitement, Martha explained. "Eleanor and I have been talking with Patricia Adams over at the Senior Center. After what happened with Hope, we got to thinking about all the senior citizens in town who live alone and all the animals at the county shelter waiting for homes. We're calling it Golden Companions," Eleanor continued enthusiastically. "The idea is to match seniors who want companionship but worry about the long-term commitment of pet ownership with shelter animals who need temporary foster homes. The shelter provides food and veterinary care, and the seniors provide love and a home environment." It's brilliant," Sarah interjected. "I've already agreed to do monthly checkups for all the animals in the program. The health benefits for both the seniors and the animals could be significant." Jenny smiled at her mother with newfound appreciation. "Mom, that's amazing. When did you have time to organize all this?" Martha shrugged, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Retirement leaves a lot of hours to fill. Besides, watching Hope and Caleb together, it reminds me how much healing can happen when two souls connect." The conversation was interrupted by a firm knock at the door. Officer Peterson stood on the porch, his police hat in his hands and a serious expression on his face. "Ladies," he greeted them as Martha invited him in. "Sorry to intrude on your morning, but I thought you'd want an update on our investigation." The room grew quiet as Peterson accepted a seat at the kitchen table. Hope, sensing the change in atmosphere, lifted his head attentively. "We've identified where Hope came from," Peterson began, pulling out his notepad. "The tag in the suitcase led us to Oak Ridge Kennels, as we suspected. The owner, Robert Davidson, confirmed that Hope was born there 3 months ago, identified by that crescent moon marking on his belly." "Did Davidson sell him to whoever did this to him?" Jenny asked, her voice tight with anger. Peterson shook his head. "Davidson claims he sold the puppy to what appeared to be a legitimate buyer, a man named James Wheeler, who said he wanted a show-quality German Shepherd, paid cash, seemed knowledgeable about the breed. But when we tracked down this Wheeler, we discovered he's connected to an underground network of illegal breeders." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "They were going to use him for breeding?" "Not exactly," Peterson replied grimly. "From what we've pieced together, Wheeler works for a man named Victor Hargrove, who runs what he calls specialty training facilities in 3 different states. They acquire purebred puppies, put them through intensive training using questionable methods, then sell them at premium prices as elite protection dogs." "But why was Hope in that suitcase?" Sarah asked, professional concern evident in her voice. Peterson's jaw tightened. "According to a former employee we interviewed, puppies who don't meet their standards, who are too gentle or don't respond to their training methods, are disposed of to protect the reputation of their operation. They can't have failed. Dogs traced back to them." A heavy silence fell over the room. Martha instinctively reached for Caleb, who had crawled back to his mother, blissfully unaware of the disturbing revelations. "Have you arrested this Hargrove person?" Eleanor finally asked, her voice uncharacteristically sharp. "Not yet," Peterson admitted. "We've got enough to bring in Wheeler on animal cruelty charges, but Hargrove is more careful, keeps his distance from the dirty work. But we're building a case," And the state police are now involved since it crosses county lines. As the adults processed this troubling information, a soft whine drew their attention to Hope. The puppy had managed to stand and was making his way slowly, carefully, across the living room floor. His first real attempt at walking since his rescue. His destination was clear: Caleb, who sat watching the puppy's approach with rapt attention. The conversation forgotten, everyone watched in silent wonder as Hope painfully but determinedly closed the distance between himself and the baby. When he finally reached Caleb, the puppy collapsed in exhaustion, his head resting against the baby's leg. Caleb, with surprising gentleness, patted Hope's head, making soft cooing sounds that seemed to say, "Well done." "Would you look at that?" Peterson whispered, the hardened police officer momentarily transformed by the scene before him. After everything that Pup's been through, he still trusts. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. That's the miracle, isn't it? Not just that Caleb heard him when no one else could, but that after such cruelty, Hope can still open his heart. In that quiet moment, as July sunlight streamed through the windows of the Sullivan home, the true healing power of the connection between baby and puppy became clear to everyone present. It wasn't just Hope's body that was mending, it was his spirit, and somehow the 8-month-old boy, with the extraordinary hearing, was helping guide that process. Later that afternoon, after Sarah and Officer Peterson had left, Martha sat in her garden watching Jenny push Caleb in his swing while Hope dozed nearby on a blanket. The normalcy of the scene belied the remarkable circumstances that had brought them all together. "Mom," Jenny said suddenly, slowing the swing's momentum, "I've been thinking about something." Martha looked up from the sock she was knitting. The first of many she planned to donate to the animal shelter for their smallest residents. "What's that, dear?" Jenny hesitated, then continued. "When Kevin comes home from deployment next month, I think we should adopt Hope officially. Make him part of our family." Martha's hands stilled. "Are you sure, Jenny? A puppy is a big responsibility, especially with Kevin adjusting to being home and you working those long shifts." "I've never been more sure of anything," Jenny replied, her gaze moving between her son and the sleeping puppy. "They belong together, Mom. Anyone can see that. Besides," she added with a smile, "I have a feeling you wouldn't mind helping with dog-sitting duties." Martha chuckled. "You know me too well." She resumed her knitting, the soft clicking of needles mixing with bird songs and Caleb's happy babbling. "Eleanor says the whole town is changing because of what happened. People bringing treats to the animal shelter, volunteering, donating. The mayor's even talking about building a proper dog park next spring." "One small moment," Jenny mused, gently pushing the swing again. One tiny baby hearing what no one else could hear. That's all it took. As the afternoon drifted toward evening, more visitors arrived. Neighbors bringing casseroles and well-wishes, children eager to see the famous puppy, seniors interested in the Golden Companions program Martha and Eleanor were developing. The Sullivan home, once a quiet refuge for a widow, helping her daughter through single parenthood, had transformed into something of a community hub, a place where compassion had taken root and continued to grow. And at the center of it all, oblivious to their catalyst role in this transformation, a baby and a puppy forged. A bond that transcended the limitations of species and age. A silent conversation of hearts that everyone around them was learning to hear. By mid-August, Maplewood had undergone a subtle but profound transformation. What began as one extraordinary moment between a baby and a puppy had rippled outward, touching lives throughout the small Vermont town in unexpected ways. The town square, once simply a pleasant but unremarkable green space, now featured a newly installed bench with a small bronze plaque reading "Compassion begins with listening," a gift from the Maplewood Business Association. Each weekend, the farmers' market bustled with a new energy as Martha Sullivan's craft stall became something of a local attraction. Visitors came ostensibly to purchase her handmade items, but stayed to hear firsthand the story that had captured hearts far beyond the town limits. "It wasn't anything special I did," Martha would insist to customers as she wrapped a decorative birdhouse or hand-knitted dog toy. It was Caleb who heard what the rest of us couldn't. At the Sullivan home, Hope's recovery had progressed remarkably. The bandages were gone, and though faint scars remained on his paws, they did nothing to slow him down as he romped carefully in the fenced backyard under Martha's watchful eye. Dr. Reynolds had declared him a medical miracle, attributing his swift healing as much to the loving environment as to her veterinary care. "Some animals never recover emotionally from that kind of trauma," Sarah had explained during her last official checkup visit. "But Hope seems to have no lasting psychological damage. It's as if he understands he's safe now." Martha, sitting at her kitchen table sorting through a pile of mail, smiled at the memory of Sarah's words. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the countless cards and letters that continued to arrive daily. Messages of support, thanks, and encouragement from people moved by Caleb and Hope's story. Jenny entered the kitchen, her hair still damp from the shower, dressed in the crisp uniform of her new position as assistant manager at the diner. "Anything important in today's haul?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Martha held up a thick cream-colored envelope. "The mayor's office sent over the finalized details for next week's ceremony. They're breaking ground on the new Animal Welfare Center, and they want Caleb to be there for the photo op." Jenny laughed, shaking her head in amazement. "My 8-month-old son cutting ribbons and breaking ground. Kevin's not going to believe any of this when he gets home." The mention of her son-in-law brought a warm smile to Martha's face. Kevin Sullivan would be returning from his military deployment in just 3 days, coming home to a family situation quite different from the one he'd left behind. "Have you decided how you're going to explain everything?" Martha asked, setting aside a particularly touching letter from a third-grade class in Burlington who had raised money for the local animal shelter in Caleb's honor. Jenny leaned against the counter, her expression thoughtful. "I've sent him pictures and tried to explain in our video calls, but I don't think anyone can really understand the connection between Caleb and Hope without seeing it firsthand." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Hope trotted into the kitchen, his nails clicking on the tile floor. At nearly 4 months old, he was growing rapidly, his once dull coat now gleaming with health. He made a beeline for the living room, where Caleb was practicing standing while holding onto the coffee table, a new skill he'd developed in the past week. Martha and Jenny followed, watching as Hope positioned himself next to Caleb, standing perfectly still as the baby gripped his fur for balance. It was a routine they'd developed naturally, the puppy instinctively understanding his role in supporting his tiny human friend. "See what I mean?" Jenny said softly. "How do you explain that?" The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Martha went to answer it, finding Eleanor Jacobson and Patricia Adams, the director of the senior center, on the porch. "We're not interrupting breakfast, are we?" Patricia asked, her arms filled with folders and a laptop case. Martha welcomed them in. "Not at all. Jenny was just leaving for work. We were admiring the dynamic duo in the living room." As Patricia set up her materials on the dining room table, Eleanor made her way to where Caleb and Hope were engaged in their balancing practice. At 82, Eleanor moved more slowly these days, but her eyes remained sharp and observant. "That dog knows exactly what he's doing," she remarked, lowering herself carefully onto the sofa. "Smart as a whip, that one." Jenny kissed her son goodbye, gave Hope a gentle pat, and headed out to her shift at the diner, leaving Martha to the Golden Companions meeting that had become a weekly fixture at the Sullivan home. We've got 5 new seniors signed up this week, Patricia announced proudly, opening her laptop. And the county shelter says they have at least 7 animals that would be perfect matches. Martha beamed as she served coffee and the remaining blueberry muffins from the previous day's baking. What had begun as a casual conversation had blossomed into a full-fledged community program with a dedicated volunteer committee, donation fund, and growing waitlist of participants. The State Department of Aging called yesterday, Patricia continued. They want to use Golden Companions as a model for other communities, said they've never seen an initiative gain so much traction so quickly. Eleanor sipped her coffee with satisfaction. All because a baby heard a puppy crying when no one else could. Goes to show you never know which small moment might change everything. Their planning session was interrupted by the arrival of Officer Peterson, who rarely stopped by during working hours. His expression was uncharacteristically animated as Martha invited him in. "I thought you ladies would want to hear this directly from me," he said, declining Martha's offer of coffee. "We've arrested Victor Hargrove. The whole operation is being shut down as we speak." Martha gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "You found enough evidence?" Peterson nodded, a rare smile breaking through his professional demeanor. Wheeler turned state's evidence. Once he realized how serious the charges were, he gave us everything: documentation, locations, client lists. Hargrove had operations in Vermont, New Hampshire, and upstate New York. We're talking dozens of animals, Martha. "Will they all be rescued?" Patricia asked, her social worker's heart immediately concerned for the welfare of the animals. "State authorities are coordinating with animal welfare organizations as we speak," Peterson confirmed. "It's going to be the largest rescue operation this region has seen in decades." The significance of the moment hung in the air. What had begun with the rescue of one puppy had expanded to potentially save countless animals from cruelty and neglect. From the living room came the sound of Caleb's delighted laughter. Everyone turned to see that the baby had managed to take 2 wobbly steps while holding onto Hope's fur before plopping down on his diapered bottom. The puppy immediately licked his face, tail wagging vigorously as if congratulating his friend on the accomplishment. "Dr. Reynolds says Hope will be ready for his therapy dog training next month," Martha said, watching the pair with affection. "She thinks he has the perfect temperament for it, gentle but resilient." Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. After what he's been through, he'd understand suffering better than most. Might be able to connect with people in a special way." Later that afternoon, after her visitors had departed, Martha sat on the porch swing with Caleb napping in her arms and Hope stretched out at her feet. The peaceful scene belied the remarkable journey they had all taken over the past 6 weeks. Across the street, a moving truck pulled up to the house that had stood empty for nearly a year. Martha watched with interest as a young couple emerged, followed by 2 children and a golden retriever on a leash. "New neighbors, Hope," she whispered, not wanting to wake Caleb. "Looks like you'll have a friend to play with." The golden retriever noticed them on the porch and strained at its leash, tail wagging. The woman holding the leash looked over, smiled, and waved. "Hello," she called across the street. "You must be Martha Sullivan. We've been hoping to meet you." Martha blinked in surprise. "You know who I am?" The woman laughed, crossing the street with her dog, while her husband supervised the movers. "Everyone knows who you are. Your story, well, your grandson's story, is why we chose Maplewood. I'm Melissa Peterson, and this is Daisy." As Melissa approached the porch, Hope rose to his feet, alert but not alarmed. The golden retriever, Daisy, wagged her tail in friendly greeting. "We read about what happened with your grandson and Hope," Melissa explained. "About how it changed the town, started that program for seniors and pets. My husband works remotely, so we could live anywhere. We wanted a community with heart, somewhere our kids could learn values like compassion and courage." Martha was momentarily speechless, touched by the realization that the ripples from that day at the recycling center had reached far enough to influence a family's decision about where to make their home. "Well," she finally said, recovering her composure, "welcome to Maplewood. I think you'll find it lives up to its reputation." As Melissa returned to help with the move, Martha felt a deep satisfaction settle over her. In just a few short weeks, she had witnessed a transformation, not just in Hope and Caleb, but in the very fabric of the community she had called home for over 50 years. The town council meeting that evening was unusually well attended. The small municipal building's meeting room overflowed with citizens of all ages, necessitating the opening of folding doors to an adjacent space. Jenny had arranged to switch shifts with a co-worker so she could attend, bringing Caleb with her. Martha sat beside them, with Hope lying dutifully at their feet, now sporting a therapy dog in training vest that Dr. Reynolds had presented him with that morning. Mayor Thompson, a tall man with silver hair and a perpetually harried expression, called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "Before we address the items on tonight's agenda," he announced, "I want to recognize some very special guests." He gestured toward the Sullivan family. Martha and Jenny Sullivan, along with young Caleb and Hope, have joined us tonight. As many of you know, the animal welfare ordinance we'll be voting on shortly has been nicknamed Caleb's Law, in honor of this remarkable young man. Applause filled the room as Jenny stood briefly, lifting Caleb's hand to wave at the crowd. The baby, confused by the attention but happy to be acknowledged, broke into a wide, toothless grin that elicited appreciative laughter. "I'd also like to recognize Officer Stanley Peterson," the mayor continued. "Stan, I understand there's been a significant development in the case connected to Hope's rescue." Peterson stood, straightening his uniform. "Yes, Mr. Mayor. As some of you may have already heard, earlier today, state and federal authorities successfully shut down an illegal operation spanning 3 states. The investigation, which began right here in Maplewood with the discovery of an abused puppy, has led to the rescue of 37 dogs and the arrest of 6 individuals on multiple charges of animal cruelty, fraud, and racketeering." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Martha felt tears prick her eyes as she reached down to stroke Hope's head. The puppy, sensing her emotion, pressed closer against her leg in silent support. "This is why the ordinance we're considering tonight matters," Mayor Thompson said when the room had quieted. "One incident, one moment of compassion, revealed a need for systematic change. The proposed Caleb's Law would establish the strictest animal welfare protections in the state, creating a dedicated enforcement division, mandatory reporting protocols for suspected abuse, and education programs in our schools." As the mayor outlined the details of the proposed ordinance, Martha glanced around the packed room. She recognized faces from every corner of Maplewood's community: the high school principal, the pastor from the Methodist church, the owner of the hardware store, the librarian. People who might never have come together for a town council meeting were united in purpose, drawn by a story that had touched something fundamental in each of them. When the vote was called, the ordinance passed unanimously, accompanied by a standing ovation that startled Hope into a brief, confused barking that only added to the celebratory atmosphere. Outside the municipal building, as townspeople lingered in small groups discussing the historic vote, Jenny turned to her mother with shining eyes. "Kevin lands at Burlington International at noon on Saturday," she said. "I was thinking, would you mind if we brought Hope to the airport? I want them to meet right away." Martha squeezed her daughter's hand. "I think that's a wonderful idea. After all, Hope's part of the family now." As they walked home through the quiet streets of Maplewood, Hope trotting ahead with his training vest still proudly in place, Martha reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had unfolded from one simple moment of connection between a baby and a suffering animal. What might have been just another sad story, a discarded puppy, undiscovered and forgotten, had instead become a catalyst for healing and change that extended far beyond one family or even one town. "You know," she said to Jenny as they turned onto Maple Street, where porch lights glowed welcomingly in the twilight, "I've lived in this town my whole life, but I've never felt as much a part of it as I do now." Jenny shifted a sleeping Caleb in her arms and smiled. "That's because you helped everyone remember what community really means, Mom. You and this little guy," she added, looking down at her son. "And Hope, of course." As if hearing his name, Hope paused and looked back at them, his amber eyes reflecting the streetlights with an almost supernatural glow. In that moment, Martha could almost believe the puppy understood everything, the pain he had endured, the love that had saved him, and the difference his story had made. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Kevin's homecoming, the groundbreaking ceremony for the Animal Welfare Center, the first official matches for the Golden Companions program. But tonight, walking home with 3 generations of her family, under a canopy of stars, Martha Sullivan knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the smallest voices, a baby's cry, a puppy's whimper, could speak the truths that changed the world. The arrivals terminal at Burlington International Airport hummed with the familiar energy of weekend travel. Families clutched welcome signs, business travelers hurried toward rental car counters, and in the midst of it all, Jenny Sullivan stood, with Caleb in her arms, her eyes fixed on the gate where passengers from Kevin's flight would soon emerge. "Are you sure this was a good idea?" she asked for perhaps the 10th time, adjusting the Welcome Home Daddy sign clipped to Caleb's overalls. Beside her, Martha smiled reassuringly. "It's perfect, Jenny. Kevin will understand." At their feet, Hope sat patiently in his therapy dog vest, remarkably composed, despite the chaotic airport environment. In the 6 weeks since his rescue, the puppy had grown not just in size, but in confidence. Under Dr. Reynolds' guidance, and with Martha's consistent training, Hope had developed an uncanny ability to remain calm in any situation, as long as Caleb was nearby. "Flight 237 from Fort Bragg now arriving at Gate C," announced the overhead speaker, sending a jolt of anticipation through Jenny. "That's him," she whispered, her voice catching. It had been nearly 9 months since she'd seen her husband in person, 9 months during which her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined when saying goodbye at this same airport. Passengers began streaming through the arrival gate, wheeling carry-ons and clutching travel pillows. Jenny stood on tiptoes, scanning the crowd for the familiar face she'd been missing for so long. And then, suddenly, there he was. Sergeant Kevin Sullivan, still in his army fatigues, looked exactly as Jenny remembered, yet somehow different, a little leaner, his face more weathered, his eyes holding experiences she would never fully understand. For a moment, he didn't see them, his gaze sweeping the crowd with the alert assessment of a soldier in unfamiliar territory. "Kevin!" Jenny called, her free arm waving above the crowd. His head turned, and in an instant, his serious expression melted into a smile that erased the months of separation. He navigated through the crowd with purpose, dropping his duffel bag to the floor as he reached his family. "Jenny," he breathed, wrapping his arms around his wife and son in a careful embrace. "And this big guy can't be Caleb. No way." Caleb, who had been unusually quiet, studying this familiar stranger with solemn eyes, suddenly broke into a delighted smile, reaching for his father's face with curious fingers. "He remembers you," Jenny said, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "I've shown him your picture every day." Kevin took his son in his arms, marveling at how much had changed. "He's so big now, standing and everything." He kissed the top of Caleb's head, inhaling the sweet baby scent he'd dreamed about during long desert nights. It was then that Hope, who had remained dutifully seated during the reunion, gave a soft whine of introduction. Kevin looked down, noticing the German Shepherd puppy for the first time. "And who's this?" he asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. Jenny and Martha exchanged glances. Despite their detailed explanations over video calls, they knew the full story of Hope and his extraordinary connection to Caleb would take time to unfold. "This is Hope," Jenny said simply. "He's part of our family now." To everyone's surprise, Caleb chose that moment to contribute to the conversation, pointing at Hope and clearly articulating, "Dada, Hope." It was the first time he had attempted to name either his father or the puppy, and the significance of joining them in his first real words wasn't lost on anyone. Kevin knelt, still holding Caleb, to look the puppy in the eyes. Hope held his gaze with remarkable steadiness for a young dog, his tail wagging in gentle greeting. "Well, Hope," Kevin said softly, "it seems like you've been taking care of my family while I've been away." The drive back to Maplewood was filled with catching up. Jenny describing her promotion at the diner, Martha detailing the Golden Companions program that now had over 20 successful matches, and both women taking turns explaining the remarkable chain of events that had begun that fateful day at the recycling center. "So our son is some kind of dog-whispering superhero?" Kevin asked, glancing back at Caleb, who was happily babbling to Hope in the back seat. Jenny smiled. "Dr. Michaels calls it heightened auditory processing sensitivity, but superhero works too." As they drove down Main Street, Kevin stared out the window in surprise. "Is that a banner with Caleb's picture on it?" Sure enough, stretched across the town square, was a large banner announcing the groundbreaking ceremony for the Maplewood Animal Welfare Center, featuring a photograph of Caleb and Hope taken at the town council meeting. "I tried to tell you how big this has gotten," Jenny said, a hint of apology in her voice. "The whole town has changed." Kevin shook his head in amazement. 9 months away and my son becomes a local celebrity. What else have I missed? Paniju? Answer to that question unfolded over the following days as Kevin was reintegrated into a family and community that had been profoundly transformed during his absence. At the Sullivan home, he watched in fascination as Hope instinctively positioned himself beside Caleb during the baby's attempts at walking, providing both physical support and encouragement. He met Dr. Reynolds during one of her checkup visits and listened as she explained Hope's remarkable recovery and his promising future as a therapy dog. "The scars on his paws will always be visible," Sarah explained as she examined the puppy, "but they don't cause him any pain now. Physically, he's completely healed." "And emotionally?" Kevin asked, the soldier in him understanding that some wounds went deeper than flesh. Sarah smiled. "That's the real miracle. Dogs who experience that kind of trauma often develop fear responses, aggression, trust issues. Hope shows none of that. It's as if his connection with Caleb somehow helped him process and move beyond the trauma. On Saturday morning, the Sullivan family made their way to the town square for the groundbreaking ceremony. The entire community seemed to have turned out for the occasion, along with news crews from Burlington and even a team from a national morning show that had featured Caleb and Hope's story the previous month. Mayor Thompson greeted them warmly, paying special attention to Kevin. "Sergeant Sullivan, it's an honor to have you home. Your son has made quite an impact on our town while you've been serving our country." The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Jenny held Caleb as he helped place a small shovel in the earth where the new Animal Welfare Center would stand. Hope remained at attention beside them, his therapy dog vest gleaming in the morning sun. When the crowd applauded, the puppy didn't flinch, a testament to how far he had come from the terrified creature found in that abandoned suitcase. After the ceremony, as volunteers served refreshments from folding tables, the Sullivans found themselves at the center of attention. Neighbors Kevin hadn't seen in nearly a year came to welcome him home and share how Caleb and Hope's story had affected them personally. "Your boy got my Henry volunteering at the shelter," said Mrs. Patterson, whose teenage son had previously been known primarily for his dedication to video games. "Now he's talking about becoming a veterinarian. And the Golden Companions program has changed my mother's life completely," added Principal Winters. "She was so isolated after my father's passing, but having a foster dog has given her a reason to get up every morning." As Kevin absorbed these stories, a tall man in an expensive suit approached their group. "Sergeant Sullivan, I'm Robert Davidson, owner of Oak Ridge Kennels." Martha's expression cooled slightly. Though Davidson's business had been cleared of any wrongdoing in Hope's case, the puppy had been legitimately sold, with no way for the breeder to know the buyer's true intentions. She still harbored mixed feelings about the man whose high-end operation focused more on pedigrees than on the welfare of animals. Davidson seemed to sense her reservation. "Mrs. Sullivan, I want to thank you and your family. What happened with Hope and your response to it has forced many of us in the breeding community to reconsider our practices." "This was unexpected." Martha raised an eyebrow. "In what way, Mr. Davidson?" "After the news broke, I investigated every buyer we've sold to in the past 5 years," Davidson explained. "I discovered 2 other instances where our puppies may have ended up in questionable situations. We've completely revamped our screening process, requiring home visits before approving sales and following up regularly with buyers." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed Kevin a business card. "I'm also establishing a foundation to support responsible breeding practices and adoption initiatives. I'd be honored if your family would consider serving on the advisory board." Before Kevin could respond, a commotion near the refreshment tables drew everyone's attention. A child had accidentally knocked over a stack of cups, creating a loud crash that sent several dogs into a barking frenzy. Hope, however, remained perfectly calm, moving closer to Caleb as if to reassure him that everything was fine. Davidson watched the puppy with professional appreciation. Extraordinary temperament. Even without his history, that alone would make him special. As the event wound down, the Sullivans made their way home, declining several invitations for lunch or coffee. Kevin, still adjusting to civilian life and the whirlwind of attention, needed some quiet family time. On their front porch, they found a package wrapped in simple brown paper with a note from Eleanor Jacobson. "Something to mark the occasion. Welcome home, Kevin." Inside was a beautifully framed photograph that Eleanor had taken the day Hope came to live with them. It captured Caleb reaching out to touch the bandaged puppy's nose, both of them illuminated by sunlight streaming through the window. A perfect moment of connection, frozen in time. Kevin studied the photograph, then looked at his son, now napping against Jenny's shoulder, and the puppy sitting attentively at his feet. "I missed so much," he said quietly. Martha touched his arm gently. "But you're here now for everything that comes next." The following week brought a new routine as Kevin adjusted to being home. The Army had granted him a longer reintegration leave due to the length of his deployment, giving him precious time to reconnect with his family before deciding whether to re-enlist or transition to civilian life. One sunny morning, he sat on the back porch with Martha, watching as Jenny helped Caleb practice walking in the grass, with Hope providing his special brand of support. "Jenny tells me you're thinking of making the therapy dog training official," Kevin said, sipping the coffee his mother-in-law had prepared. Martha nodded. "Dr. Reynolds has connections with a program that trains dogs for work in hospitals, schools, and veterans centers. She thinks Hope has extraordinary potential." Kevin's eyes followed the puppy's careful movements beside his son. "Veterans centers, huh? I know some guys who could use a friend like Hope." Martha studied her son-in-law's face, noting the shadows that sometimes crossed his features when he thought no one was looking. The program director mentioned they're always looking for handlers to work with the dogs. People who understand what the veterans are going through. Kevin's expression shifted slightly as he considered this. You think I could do something like that? I think you and Hope might make quite a team, Martha replied simply. Their conversation was interrupted by Jenny's excited call from the lawn. Kevin, Mum, come quick. They hurried down the porch steps to find Jenny kneeling in the grass, her phone recording as Caleb stood unassisted for the first time. Hope positioned himself a few feet away, tail wagging encouragingly. He was holding on to Hope, but then he just let go and stayed standing, Jenny explained, her voice trembling with excitement. As they watched, Caleb looked from his mother to his father, then to Hope. With determination in his small face, he lifted one foot and placed it forward, then the other. 1, 2, 3. Unsteady but purposeful steps toward the waiting puppy. Hope remained perfectly still, his amber eyes fixed on Caleb, offering a stable target for the baby's first independent journey. When Caleb reached him, collapsing against his furry side, with a triumphant giggle, Hope licked his face gently as if to say, "Well done." There wasn't a dry eye in the yard. Kevin scooped up his son, pride and love overwhelming him. "That's my boy," he whispered. "So brave." That evening, as summer twilight lingered over Maplewood, the Sullivans sat on their front porch enjoying the cool breeze. Neighbors walking by stopped to chat, children rode bikes in the street, and the ordinary magic of small-town life unfolded around them. "I've been thinking," Kevin said, his arm around Jenny as Caleb dozed in his lap, "about what comes next. For us." Jenny looked up at her husband, hearing something new in his voice. "And I love being a soldier," he said slowly. "But this deployment made me realize what I've been missing. I don't want to be away from you and Caleb for months at a time anymore." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "There's a position opening up at the Veterans Center in Burlington, readjustment counselor. I'd be helping guys transitioning back to civilian life, dealing with some of the same stuff I went through. And, Jenny prompted when he hesitated. "And they're looking for a therapy dog team to work with veterans dealing with PTSD and anxiety. I think Hope and I could do that together once he finishes his training." Martha, who had been pretending to focus on her knitting, smiled to herself. The idea had taken root, just as she'd hoped it might. "What do you think?" Kevin asked Jenny. She touched his face gently. "I think you'd be amazing at it. Both of you." From his sleeping place beside the porch swing, Hope lifted his head at the sound of his name, his ears perked with interest. "I'd still be serving," Kevin continued, "just in a different way. And I'd be home every night with you and Caleb." The conversation continued. Mapping out this new future together, Martha reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them to this moment. An abandoned puppy, a baby with a special gift, a town awakened to compassion, all because of one moment of connection that might so easily have been missed. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn day, a very different gathering took place at the newly completed Maplewood Animal Welfare Center. Ribbons had been cut, speeches made, and now the community was celebrating with an adoption fair that had already found homes for 15 animals from the county shelter. Inside the center's main hall, a special ceremony was underway. Hope, now a fully certified therapy dog, sat proudly beside Kevin as they received an award from the Vermont Humane Society for their work with veterans. At 18 months old, the German Shepherd was a beautiful adult dog, though the faint scars on his paws remained visible, reminders of his beginnings. Caleb, now a toddler with an impressive vocabulary for his age, stood between his parents, clapping enthusiastically as his father and Hope accepted the award. Dr. Reynolds, who had just completed a tour of the center's state-of-the-art veterinary clinic that she would oversee part-time, watched with professional pride at how her former patient had thrived. Martha, standing nearby with Eleanor Jacobson, felt a sense of completion as she watched the scene unfold. The Golden Companions program they had started had become a model adopted by communities across 3 states. The legislation inspired by Hope's rescue had led to stronger animal protection laws throughout Vermont. And most importantly, the connections formed in that pivotal moment had continued to grow and strengthen, creating a web of relationships that had transformed countless lives. As the ceremony concluded, Kevin knelt beside his son. "Remember what I told you about Hope, Caleb, about why his name is so special?" Caleb nodded solemnly. "Because he never gave up hope." "That's right," Kevin agreed. "No matter what happened to him, he kept his heart open. That's why he could hear you when you were just a baby, and why you could hear him when no one else could. Sometimes hope is the quietest voice, but if we listen carefully enough, it can change everything." Martha watched as Hope gently nuzzled Caleb's cheek, the bond between them as strong as ever. In that moment, she understood with perfect clarity that the true miracle wasn't just that a baby had heard a puppy's cry, or that a community had awakened to compassion. The miracle was in the listening itself, in the quiet moments when one heart recognizes another's need and responds with love. As families continued to mill around the adoption fair, making connections that would change both human and animal lives, Martha knew that the circle that had begun with Caleb and Hope would continue to widen. Each new connection, each act of compassion, each moment of truly seeing another's suffering would create its own ripples, extending outward in ways they might never fully comprehend. And in a world that sometimes seemed filled with noise and chaos, perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, that the voices most worth hearing might be the quietest ones, the whimper of a suffering creature, the wordless understanding of a child, the silent call of one heart to another. All we need to do is listen. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Caleb and Hope has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Their journey reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary connections begin with simply listening to what others cannot hear. For more emotionally captivating stories that celebrate the power of compassion and the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals, we've prepared a special playlist you can find by clicking on the link to your left. If this tale of a remarkable baby and his rescued dog moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life's unexpected moments. Don't miss our upcoming content. More heartwarming tales await. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Has an animal ever changed your life in a profound way? Share your story with our community of compassionate listeners.